Every year in Armenia, up to 1 million cubic meters of timber is cut. At one time, 11% of the territory of Armenia was covered with dense forests. Due to the ongoing logging of timber, at least 1 million cubic meters a year, it has taken only a few years for half of the country's forests to be destroyed. The experts' calculation is an alarm for everyone. Many in Armenia condemn illegal cutting, but few would believe that the consequences can be compared to the explosion of an atom bomb. But such a disaster is not far off. Only 1 or 2 decades are left. In the last 20 years, the number of forests in our region has been halved. That puts the future generations at risk of living in the desert.
Since Soviet times, our forests were considered first-rate forests, where no industrial cutting was allowed. It is supposedly still that way. Past, present, and newly considered legislation are well supposed to protect our forests, but many things are done under the guise of sanitary cuttings.
Due to the geographical position and the lack of green territories, forests in Armenia provide mainly a protective role. They guarantee water regeneration, prevent soil erosion, and minimize landslides. It wasn't unintentional that in Soviet Armenia, industrial cutting was prohibited and the timber was completely imported from Russia. Today, the number of forests in Armenia hasn't increased, but the export of timber to Turkey, Iran, Germany, Italy, and Spain most certainly has. In 2002, part of the tree root supply used in industrial production in Europe was exported from Armenia. Armenian wood is in demand in Spain and Italy. Timber exported from Tavush's Zikatar Heath and Artsakh is used in making rifle hilts or for automobile interiors. In Karabakh alone, 10,000 nut trees were cut, including an endangered nut tree species that has long been included in the Red Book. Many other valuable and high-quality trees that are almost on the edge of extinction are cut in Lori. Experts are raising alarms about the approaching eco-catastrophe, and many Armenian citizens also have a sense of impending disaster. Numerous organizations are not only launching active public awareness activities to keep society abreast, but they themselves are starting to protect forests and to engage in the process of planting new forests. The organization Greenland is headed by eminent artist Sos Sarkisyan.
According to the information I have, 13% of the territory of Armenia was covered with forests. I suppose today only 6.5%, at most 7% are left. I think this is a multi-dimensional problem. Armenians have always adored trees. In the past, the ones cutting trees were doing so out of necessity. Now, however, people are cutting forests not only for their personal use. It has become a mafia activity to cut Armenian forests whether there is a need or not. Unless we, our nation and government, stand up and start protecting our forests, Armenia will become uninhabitable.
During the last 70 years, Armenian forests were twice massively cut. For industrial purposes in the period between 1930 and 1950, and because of the fuel and energy crisis in 1992 through 1995. The effects of this last phase are still continuing. According to the latest data, woodland per head in Armenia is 27 times less than the average figures in any other country of the CIS. In fact, it's impossible to evaluate the real state of Armenian forests, as it is not clearly known what part of the once green zones is still preserved, what part is overgrown with shrubs, and what part is entirely cut and even deliberately set fire to so as to cover up the evidence of cutting. In the first decade of Armenia's independence, its forests were destroyed largely out of a need for fuel during the energy crisis. The objective of the forest destruction in this second decade of independence is primarily industrial, represented as sanitary cutting. The government cannot allocate money to clearly evaluate the situation. But clearly, the issue of the day is this: how can we assist in the natural restoration of forests? According to ecologists, even one hasty step can have devastating consequences for the gradually reducing green zones. Every year in Armenia, more than 4,000 hectares of forestry is cut only for fuel. In the regions most affected by massive cutting, approximately 2,000 hectares is planted by the Ministry of Ecology. Nevertheless, it is not such a big achievement if we take into account recent figures. The World Bank calculation causes serious worries. If massive cutting continues at such a rate, in 20 years, there will be no more forests in Armenia. 15 years ago, there was a dense forest here. As in many other parts of Armenia, the forest here was completely destroyed. But 3 years ago, 135,000 trees were planted here. Perhaps by European standards, the quantity is not so impressive. But for Armenia, it's of vital importance. Besides, it is very important that the reforestation project was carried out by the Odzone village community in assistance with the NGO Armenian Forests. This is the first community forest project in recent Armenian history. The NGO Armenian Forests is conducting reforestation and restoration projects. Armenian Forest fights against massive illegal cutting and tries to take measures to better enforce current laws. The project carried out by this organization has successfully shown how it is possible to restore Armenian forests.
Right now, 4,000 to 7,000 hectares worth of forests are being cut every year, and only several hundred hectares are being planted. At that rate, our forests will be gone in about 20 years. This spells disaster, not only for Armenia's forests, but for our soil, for our water, for our air, for crops, and for Armenia's people. We need to take specific steps very quickly to stop illegal cutting, to curb the export of trees that are going to other countries.
Armenian Forests NGO, with the help of its employees, sets about restoring forests by cutting unnecessary twigs that grow on stumps, leaving only the healthiest and the strongest ones, so that the stumps don't turn into bushes, but rather become full trees.
I have been working as a rural head since 1996. At that time, only 575 houses were supplied with gas. Today, this number is 1,100. I am trying to supply all the families with gas in order to save the forests from cutting. We already have very little left to cut. Nothing will be left to our future generations.
Armenian Forests NGO is carrying out its first major project in Odzone village in Lori Mars. 125,000 trees have been planted here since the spring of 2003. It's a tremendous achievement, and the Odzone village forest will become Armenia's first community forest to be planted and cared for by the villagers.
We cut the forest and now we are restoring it. It was our demand. We are planting new trees now. We were working with the sweat of our brows, and we will let no one to come and cut these trees. Everyone was working, and now everyone worries about the forest.
As a result of the constant cutting, this once forest-rich region is gradually turning into a desert. Armenia's forests were mostly cut during the years of the fuel and energy crisis in the first half of the 90s. More recently, people have been cutting Armenia's forests for industrial purposes. As a result, most Armenian regions face the real danger of various natural disasters: landslides, soil erosion, springs and rivers gradually drying up, wood resources vanishing completely. As a result of this deforestation, the topsoil is gradually disappearing. The number of landslides has unexpectedly increased near Hagartsin and Hovk villages in Tavush Mars, putting villagers' lives at risk. In the 1930s, a ring of protective forests was planted around Yerevan to help cool it down and protect it from extreme heat. The city seemed to be saved, but cuttings in the early 90s destroyed these forests, which were of vital importance to the capital. Armenia is one of the most forest-poor regions in the world and is in the last place as measured by the percent of woodland per head. But statistics are revealing new and even more alarming facts. According to town planning regulations for large communities, the total amount of green zone space per person should be at least 25 cubic meters. Yet, in Yerevan, it has fallen to 5 to 6 cubic meters. Parks have been destroyed due to the boom in the cafe business and other construction projects. Nothing is left from the once popular Nork forests. Mako's forest near the Victory Park is gradually turning into a construction site. And much of the forest in the park surrounding the sport and concert complex has been cut and burned. Day after day, the amount of unforested territory in Yerevan increases.
Statistics are showing that every year the amount of illness in the population is growing and medical problems are becoming more acute. In the 70s, people suffered mainly from respiratory tract disease. Now, cardiovascular collapse and allergy prevail. Gradually reducing number of green zones are helping to facilitate this trend. The more forest we lose, the greater the growth in illnesses.
After the forest in Nork was cut, there were landslides that threatened to turn into active mudslides. A reforestation project has already been planned and launched. Fences have been put up and the seedlings planted on 60 hectares. But the real work has only just begun. Experts assure us that this is only a drop in the bucket. Much more needs to be done. This is why reforestation is being actively pursued by another NGO. With the assistance of the Swiss government, the charitable organization Shen plans to restore former forested regions in the suburbs of Yerevan and elsewhere in the capital, mainly in the Hrazdan Gorge, Jurvesh Dendropark, Kanaker, and Nork. To begin, Shen is working to restore the former nursery forest in Jaraber village in Aragatsotny Mars. 3 hectares of land is being used as a nursery bed. Shen will provide any organization planning to get involved in reforestation projects with lime trees, ash trees, oak trees, wild pear trees, and apple trees free of charge. Shen also plans to restore the cedar forests which were completely destroyed over the last few years. The sprouts will be ready in the spring, and at that time, Shen plans to build an irrigation system. Everything, beginning from the choice of seeds to the work itself, is supervised by a foreign expert.
Recently got 3 hectares of land where we can develop a tree nursery. So like this is one area, it's about 1 hectare, and then we have over there, and on this side also belongs to Shen. And at the moment now the people here, they are planting oak seeds that we got from Karabakh. We have here volunteers that are putting in the seeds into the floor. Then we have people that are covering them, because oak seeds should be about 4 centimeters covered by earth. And we hope so that in 3 years we can start with some afforestation projects in Armenia.
Studies show that depending on climatic conditions, left to grow wild, only 5% of newly planted seedlings will take to the soil and grow into mature trees. So the newly planted forests need at least 5 years of intensive care, watering, and maintenance. Otherwise, even the best project will fail. It turns out that organizing the successive and competent care of newly planted trees is much more difficult in Armenia than the process of creating forestry itself.
In 2003, foreign experts conducted research on the situation in Armenian forests. They estimate that nearly 1 million cubic meters of forest has been cut. Imagine, in only 14 years of pressure on our forest, the seriousness of the damage done. We had a reserve of 40 million cubic meters of woodland. It's clear what we have today when every year more than 1 million cubic meters is cut. Just look at forests in Tavush, Lori or Yerevan. We need serious investment to make things better.
Forests of the Republic form 460,000 hectares, but only 334,000 hectares are forested. Only 11.2% of Armenia is forested. By experts' estimations, the total timber reserve is approximately 40 million cubic meters, with an average growth per year of 354,000 cubic meters. By international standards, industrial cutting in this kind of forest is prohibited. Armed Forest is launching an interesting initiative in 2004 aimed at creating the need for preservation of forestry in youth. In partnership with an international organization, 200 students spent their summer holiday in Lori and Tavush working to preserve forests. They lived and worked in Lorut village for 40 days. They removed fallen trees in order to prevent fires. They also dug new holes necessary for planting. They learned that in summer, trees are not planted as they will dry up.
If it were not for this initiative, few of us would ever appear in this village. We are leaving Lorut with a feeling that we gained something new, a new sense of patriotism, humanity, love for nature. In the past, noticing that someone had cut a branch would go unnoticed. Now everything will be different. Now we will think that he is cutting a branch of the tree we have planted.
Until now, the question of what department controls forests in Armenia has yet to be clarified. At one time, the structure had been fully independent. Then, the responsibility was handed over from one ministry to another. Now, forests are supposedly under the supervision of the Ministry of Agriculture, but everything is in reality controlled by the Ministry of Ecology. Recently, the Fund for Reforestation and Forest Development was formed. This fund is headed by Armenia's Prime Minister.
Huge sums are needed. What we have, naturally, is not enough. We need technical resources to secure forests from fires or catastrophes, to build new roads for tractors. The ones we have are very old and almost out of order. Long term, we have the opportunity to profit through sanitary cuttings and to invest it again in the same business, tree farming. But in forest reserves or parks, this is impossible. In other words, forest reserves and parks are financed by the government.
The main principle of sanitary cutting is that only dead trees and branches can be cut. Following the norms of developed nations, trees can also be pruned and new seedlings removed, but no more than the average amount of annual reproduction. In this case, the rate of forest growth slows down and the forests are preserved, not destroyed. Unfortunately, written and unwritten rules do not work in Armenia. Everyone is sure that planting a new tree is very important and necessary, but no one knows where to find the financing and where to begin. Normally, it is the government's job to finance this, but the government has no money. Forests can't just grow because we wish them to. We have no time to wait. Our sluggishness will cost future generations dearly.
Now this child wants us to plant. Every Armenian, every grandfather has to think what he leaves to his grandchildren. What will they inherit from us?
Preserving forests is not only the authorities' job, but also every Armenian's duty. If we don't assume this responsibility, tomorrow we will live in a desert. While you were watching this film, another 13 trees were cut in Armenia.